All right, here we go. So as a starting point, I just want to say that I'm thrilled to be part of today's program. I'm actually an intellectual property lawyer, so trademark, copyright, trade secrets, licensing, privacy, that kind of stuff. So I've really learned a lot today by listening to all of these presentations. Throughout my legal career, I've focused a lot of my volunteer, community, committee work, and other sort of extracurricular activities on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm currently the chair of the Leadership Council for Partners in Diversity, which, as many of you may know, is a program of the Portland Business Alliance's Charitable Institute. So a lot of the information I'm going to give you today comes from a study that Partners in Diversity did. I just want to start by saying that we've talked a lot today about coming back to work sort of in light of COVID concerns and all of the complications and challenges involved with that. For your employees of color, there are a whole other sort of set of concerns with coming back to work in light of the other events that have happened over the last year and a half that I'm sure everybody is well aware of. So there's this other stress or trauma or concern for employees of color in coming back to work and having to really confront or deal with issues related to race and racial tensions. So I just think it's important to put that out there. I also want to put out there that this presentation is not intended to be a recitation of employment laws, which is what we just heard. This is intended to be sort of recommendations on what you can do to sort of encourage and be more inclusive, retain your employees of color, and then all of these things are going to have to be sort of combined and considered in connection with all of the employment rules that we just heard about. So just as a starting point, Partners in Diversity was founded by business leaders 16 years ago to help employers develop a diverse workforce. It is Oregon and Southwest Washington based, so we are sort of embedded in this community. Partners in Diversity has programs for employer members, so programs that are focused on CEOs, other executives, programs for HR professionals, and then also programs for professionals of color, so for your employees. And again, we've talked about this already, sort of the situation out there is rough for everybody right now with the pandemic, economic crisis, social unrest, and then systematic racism, which is a topic that has been in the news a lot this past year and a half. So I know you're all strategizing on how you're going to move your organization forward in this sort of new time. And that includes retention of professionals of color, which is a real issue for employers, especially in our region. So this is a unique opportunity to recover, rebuild, and reimagine what your workforce will look like in this new normal. So I'm going to start by briefly talking about what is called the business case for diversity. I have to be honest with you that I don't love that phrase because I don't like really connecting the value of diversity and equity to dollars. So I think it's important to acknowledge, but I don't think that there needs to be an absolute economic ground to justify investing in people from underrepresented groups. So I would encourage you to consider making the necessary investment in the people who work for you because it honors their humanity, it honors our humanity, and it gives all of us sort of more meaning and makes our work more meaningful. So the business case for diversity. Our region is changing. Demographics are becoming more diverse along with the rest of the nation. Our clients, our customers, our employees, and our community members are becoming more diverse. And so companies have to transform to meet competitive challenges that come along with this new population. Schools are also more diverse. They're already 50% students of color, and this is the future of our workforce. So employees as well as stakeholders are demanding that businesses and organizations embrace and reflect the diversity of our communities. employees with similar backgrounds, so if everyone comes from the same place, if their background is the same, their education is the same, their worldview is the same, they are going to approach problems in the same way. A diverse workforce allows new perspectives and new approaches to be part of that conversation, assuming that you don't just have a diverse workforce, but you allow their voices to be valued and to be heard. Having a diverse workforce also signals to your investors, to your clients, potential clients, and to the community that your company is agile and a company that they want to interact with. And so, again, as our communities become more diverse, changes must be made internally to reflect this. And this is really an opportunity to connect with your clients and your customers in a culturally competent and responsive way. So I mentioned this briefly. Diverse employees should not simply be counted. So you're not just checking a box. In order to be inclusive and to retain those diverse employees, you really need to genuinely value and respect those employees and their viewpoint. The employees need to have the ability to set an agenda, to sort of have leadership positions, to influence how and what work is done, and then to have their contributions recognized and rewarded, and have further opportunities for further contributions and opportunities to advance. This is fundamentally a shift in power dynamics. And so I think it's important just to acknowledge that what we're talking about is shifting some responsibility and shifting some power to your employees of color, and doing so purposefully, not without proper training, not without proper qualifications, but making sure that those training and sort of ability to move up the ladder are available for both your employees of color as well as your majority employees. So this is an article, I'm not going to read these out loud, but this is an article from the Harvard Business Review that just came out November. It was in the November to December 2020 issue. And I put the link there. It's called, and you can just Google this, Getting Serious About Diversity, Enough Already with the Business Case. And this is, the Harvard Business Review went back on research that they had previously done on the business case for diversity. And the focus is really that it's not just sort of making platitudes of hiring diverse workforce, but and it's not just about maximizing shareholder returns, right? That's the economic issue that I was talking about. But it's about embracing this broader vision of success that encompasses learning, innovation, creativity, equity, human dignity, and you can see the quote there. I'll go on to the next slide here. This is about this sort of shift in power, right? Leaders need to embrace this issue of equity and inclusion in the workplace, because you can only really change a culture at a company or implement these changes at a company if the leaders of the company embrace it. Once your leaders sort of have created this sense of trust and have begun to dismantle any systems of discrimination or subordination in the company, then that attitude and that sort of culture can expand throughout the company, but it really needs to start at the top. I would encourage you to read this article. I'm not doing it justice by giving you just a few lines from it, but I think it's a really compelling description of how the business case for diversity is not just about making more money. It's about sort of having a more engaged workforce and making sure that everybody has the ability to contribute. And frankly, that's better for the company, because that makes sure everyone is working to the best of their ability. Okay, so I am going to go over the results from a research project that was conducted by Partners in Diversity right here in Portland and Oregon and Southwest Washington. It's the Diversity Retention Project. So the retention of well, this is Partners University's mission. I talked about that already. And it's really focused on our members who are companies here in Portland and Southwest Washington, and attracting and retaining and developing diversity influencers and professionals of color. Retention of racially diverse employees is a huge problem in our region. Professionals of color move to Oregon, and then they stay for a year or two, and then they leave. In the short time we have, I'm going to review some recent research that Partners University did on why professionals of color in our region feel disenfranchised, and ways you can be a more inclusive employer in order to keep diverse talent. And then we're going to review some solutions to improve retention. And if we were in a room together today, I would start with a poll sort of asking about your experience with diversity and equity and inclusion work in your company, as well as personally. So are you a beginner in this work? Do you know some? Are you an expert? Everyone is coming from a different place. I can't do that poll on Zoom, but I just want to acknowledge that we're all coming from different places in that work, and that's okay. And I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. Okay, so we already talked about recent events. Some companies have acknowledged recent events, have taken some action, have done training. Some people individually have taken action, read some books, sort of educated themselves. And I don't want to focus just on what we've done in the last year and a half, sort of in response to the news. I want to talk about sort of how this work can affect ongoing change that benefits your organization, not just right now, but in the long term. Some of the information I have in this report is going to make you uncomfortable, and hopefully we can sit with that discomfort, and it will motivate you to make changes in your organization. So we can rebuild and reimagine a workplace that serves everyone better. The Diversity Retention Project, this study we did, the goal was to conduct research as to why professionals of color are leaving Oregon and Southwest Washington, to improve retention strategies locally, to create more equitable outcomes for employees of color, and to support a more diverse, connected, and inclusive community. I want to acknowledge that Partners in Diversity got funding for this research from the Oregon Community Foundation and from Portland General Electric. The results of this project reveal unique insight on how employers can more successfully diversify their workforce and gain a competitive advantage with multicultural talent that exists in this community and better reflect a changing global customer base. So you all probably know this already. As you know, replacing an employee can be very expensive and varies depending on level of seniority. In 2019, the Work Institute estimated the hard cost to be about a third of the cost of the salary. That's on the low end. And this includes the cost of recruiting, relocating, background checks, drug screens, hiring temporary workers. And there's also the impact on other staff, right? And other managers who have to do a lot of work to train someone and then they leave. This box here, the purple box, other studies have the cost at a much higher amount at 1.5 to 2 times the cost of the salary. So our goal in this study was to find out why people move here and then move away so quickly. The Diversity Retention Project showed high percentages of discrimination in the workplace and in the community. So this is just the background of the study. We interviewed 30 professionals of color, as well as 5 recruitment and retention personnel. Following the in-depth interviews, we conducted a large-scale quantitative survey. All of the interviewees and survey takers were prior participants in Partners in Diversity's Say Hey program, which is a program that introduces professionals when they move to Oregon and Southwest Washington. So people move here, they participate in this program, and then we sort of keep in touch with them. And so we interviewed a lot of folks from that group. We contacted 1,000 professionals of color, and 293 of them responded. You can see in this slide that the demographic breakdown, it was pretty stratified in terms of race, mostly Black and African American, and it's skewed more toward women respondents, which is pretty common for survey responses like this. And just to be clear, this survey was conducted by a professional who does this. We provided the contact information, and it was designed by a professional. It didn't matter what job sector they were in. The reasons for leaving the workplace, or excuse me, leaving the region were the same. So here's the percentages from experiences at work. So you can see that 74% of respondents reported some form of discrimination. 70% experienced work-related strain. 17% agreed or strongly agreed that their organization was supportive, only 17%. And 27% only agreed or strongly agreed that they were satisfied with their job. So in their quantitative data, we asked about people's experiences at work and their experiences in the community. And you can see their experiences at work were not very positive. The overall picture from this data is fairly negative about the way people experience their work lives. The data from the qualitative interviews supports these numbers. What came out as primary concerns is a lack of diverse representation among the company's workforce. We saw high experiences of tokenization and a reported lack of accountability among organizational leaders, especially when diversity issues were raised. People would bring forward issues and then not feel like those issues were being taken seriously and being actioned upon appropriately. They also reported that they felt like an outsider within their own organizations, and that they often had felt like they had to work harder than their non-people of color counterparts in order to get the same types of benefits. So here's some quotes from the qualitative data that exemplify some of the experiences. This person said, "I had no idea I was killing my career with my choice of moving here. Had I known, I may not have moved at all. It's not been a good choice for me." Another one said, "I experienced racism and microaggressions on a near daily basis." I want to say here that a lot of these things don't rise to the level of actionable harassment, but they intimately affect people's quality of life, right, in coming to work every day. So while it may not rise to the level of some of the things that my colleagues were mentioning earlier, they really affect how your workforce experiences their day-to-day lives at work. Another quote, "The work environment acts as a filtering system for professionals of color. Even if we get the job, the environment is so uncomfortable that the culture itself acts as a filter." Experiences in the community, these are the percentages here, again, focusing on Oregon and Southwest Washington. We wanted to recognize and appreciate the fact that when people work in our region, they don't just work here, right? They live here. They don't just work in Portland, they live in Portland and nearby. So we asked about community in our survey, and you can see that the percentages are much worse than what people reported experiencing in the workplace. 97% of the respondents reported discrimination in the community. And if you remember, the number for the workplace was 74%, so a lot higher of a percentage. Only 1% of people agreed that they felt included in the community. 16% felt and reported that they felt uncomfortable in restaurants, stores, and public places. And 96% said that people in the region consider themselves to be more tolerant than they actually are. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit in future slides. One of the things that I want to highlight, which maybe doesn't need highlighting, is these numbers can't really be much worse than they are. 97% and 1% are very bad outcomes. We were surprised when we got this data back that the numbers were so bad. I think we knew that there was a bit of a problem, but we were really surprised to see these numbers coming in. And this data was collected in 2019, so it's not very old. And with all of the increased tension following the murder of George Floyd and following the murders of the Asian women in Atlanta, you can assume or wonder how this data may look right now. And this is why we're including this in this presentation, because it's really wrapped up in coming back to work in this environment. Okay, so one of the things that people commonly said in response to the survey and in the interviews was that there was a pervasive sense of what the respondents called Portland nice. I also think of this as Pacific Northwest nice, because I grew up outside of Chicago, and so I sort of attribute this to the whole Pacific Northwest. Portland nice or Pacific Northwest nice can manifest in a couple of different ways. But basically what it means is that there is a sense of positive interactions and people are generally nice and friendly. But when it comes down to actually allocating resources or enacting policies or showing up and being there for someone, standing up for an employee of color, then there's a lack of follow through. The metro region has a stereotypical reputation for being very liberal and progressive. That translates into an assumption that it's going to be really welcoming for people who are different in all types of ways, including race and ethnicity. But that wasn't really the case. That wasn't what people experienced. The expectation and the experience did not align, which was especially jarring, and it was quite shocking for the people that we interviewed. So just a couple of quotes that highlight this idea. And one person said, "Coming from the South, my friends and family thought that I was escaping much of the racism we experienced. We now know that racism, xenophobia, and prejudice all live here too, but in different, less overt forms. White liberals often are at the intersection of my experience." Another person said, "I had heard of this liberal, creative, progressive climate and found that to be true on the surface. The decision-making apparatus underlying that veneer was extremely conservative." Another quote, "This is a very passive-aggressive place. It feels like living in a house of mirrors." And finally, "People in this area practice subtle racism and don't even know it." These quotes all highlight this notion that there is a veneer where people coming in assume that it's a progressive and liberal place. And people living here also assume that it's a progressive and liberal place. But what that contributes is a sense that things are okay. And we call this a sense of moral licensing. That we as residents of this region are not susceptible to things like racism and prejudice. And that assumption and mindset contributes to an inability to recognize when there are problems, or an inability just to acknowledge there are problems because it feels inconsistent with how we describe ourselves. So we think of ourselves as very liberal and progressive, and when someone points out to us that some policy or procedure or the way that things have always been done is actually causing problems for people of color, it's very difficult to acknowledge that because it doesn't mesh with what we think about ourselves or our organizations. So we also asked about organizational efforts and accountability and people's experiences related to that. 83% reported that they felt like they had to work harder than their white counterparts. 70% reported tokenization, which I'll cover more in depth in a minute, and 12% agreed that their organization, only 12% agreed that their organization had a diversity-friendly work environment. Excuse my stuttering, I apologize. Only 9% agreed that their organization puts a lot of money and time into diversity initiatives. I'm gonna go a little fast here because I want to cover everything. So tokenism, the theme of tokenism was particularly prevalent and pernicious for those who felt they were the only or one of a few in their workplace or community that looked like them. 70% reported having experienced tokenism in the workplace. 75% felt that they were expected to speak for their entire race or ethnicity. 89% said that they stood out because of their race or ethnicity. And 64% were asked to sit on board, of people who were asked to sit on boards or commissions felt that they had to serve as a representative of their entire race or ethnic group. The feeling of being the only or one of a few contributed to feelings of isolation and no one to turn to for advice, or no one to turn to in terms of trying to figure out how to make sense of their experiences. As tokens, one is often made to feel sort of self-aware of their racial identities in a way that they weren't before when they were in more diverse cities or when they're in more diverse communities. People of color in this situation are left feeling that they must assimilate to the dominant culture rather than being allowed to bring their authentic self to work. Tokenism results in employees leaving the region to find places where they don't stand out. So here are some quotes. People want you there, but want you to do things the white way and not infuse your own cultural values or perspectives. I often feel like I'm asked to represent all Latinx communities in some meetings and spaces. It is very tokenish. I've been asked to talk about my hardship experience. I've been asked, what am I? Because I'm either too light, because I'm too dark or not dark enough. So what these results tell us is that people who are experiencing discrimination at work and in the community have little recourse. The lack of accountability of HR or managers to take action makes it very difficult for people to feel comfortable and feel like there's a future for them here. People also reported that there's a difficulty finding social and cultural connections. And one thing that really came out in the community interviews was this lack of community and a lack of feeling of place and a lack of feeling at home. We saw in some of the quotes that we included here, the differences that people experience in the metro region that they didn't experience in other major cities where they came from. And some things that came up, which I think is sort of really the human piece of it, is just a lack of opportunity to like hang out in one's own neighborhood, to find the type of food they wanted to eat, to go to dance clubs and listen to the music they wanted to hear, even like basic hygiene things. So not being able to find salons or barbershops that were appropriate for their culturally specific needs. So for your organizations, you know, there's a big opportunity here to invest both in internal practices, but also in the community. So what can you do? There's a lot of things you and your team can do to make a long-term impactful change to your culture. The data and testimonial you just heard me talk about might make you uncomfortable, but it's important to know that recognizing this discomfort and sort of being vulnerable and staying curious are really important pieces of creating cultural change. So if you can sort of lean into that discomfort and strive to make your workplace more inclusive and equitable, it will benefit you with a more productive and resilient team and workforce. So you'll have to really learn how to actively listen to others' perspectives, have difficult conversations, try to refrain from judgment and blaming, and try to solicit feedback about how behaviors and company practices might be impeding a more equitable culture. We need to focus more on the experience of the diverse members of your workforce and not on the intent of those in your workforce who are in the majority. So focusing on the experience of the people of color as opposed to what you intended them to experience, which is a place where lots of organizations get stuck. At the bottom of this slide is a link which has, you'll be able to find a long list of solutions and suggestions. We put together at Partners in Diversity some solutions based on our findings to help you with changing policies and practices. These solutions came from a broad group of employers and community members. There are 32 solutions on the list, but by no means is that a finite list. We categorize them into 4 main areas: employer policies and practices, which I'm going to try to go through today. And this section is aimed at improving internal policies, including recruiting, responding to concerns or complaints from employees of color. These are aimed at assuring a fair and equitable workplace environment. There is another section of community support and networking. These are ways to leverage existing Partners in Diversity, government, and other community-based programs to support newly arrived professionals of color. So you can encourage your new employees or current employees to participate in some of these things to help them feel more engaged with their community and address those feelings of discomfort in the community as a whole. There are different programs. So like, for example, the Standard and Cambia have board training programs for their employees. And the Portland Business Alliance has a Leadership Portland program. The Seattle Chamber of Commerce has a similar program. The third section is accountability for leaders. This focuses on leadership buy-in and leadership's understanding that DEI work is critical to be successful. And we're increasingly hearing more about essentially sort of linking leadership compensation to DEI, which I'm not suggesting, but it's something that's been more commonly in the news recently. And then finally, the last section is individual support and advocacy. And these are strategies to provide emotional and mental support for professionals of color. I'm going to go very quickly through the employer policies and practices section. Again, I encourage you to go to this website link. It's a free download. You can look at all of the proposed solutions. I'm going to just go through these quickly because I know you've been sitting in front of Zoom for a long time. Start thinking of human resources as an advocate for culture and try to use a cultural lens to help employees of color feel more connected and able to bring their whole selves to work. You can build partnerships with employees of color, with other organizations to help with connection so that your employees feel less feelings of isolation and loneliness. Create a model for safe, confidential, and supportive process to resolve formal and informal incidents or complaints that create barriers to equity and fairness in the workplace. So again, this is a proposal for something that doesn't rise to the level of a sort of harassment issue. And it suggests that there should be perhaps a less formal or another process to resolve complaints that, again, perhaps don't rise to that level, but that really affect an employee's happiness and success in the workplace. There are actually third parties that can help manage these types of complaints and provide a space for employees to submit complaints anonymously and can help develop policies on how to repair and move forward with employees. So develop an equity lens policy as a tool to review all your other policies. This helps to assure an equitable and fair workplace environment. There are examples of these equity policies on the Multnomah County as well as the Port of Portland websites. Avoid tokenism in the workplace. Again, this is a practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort by focusing on a few people or employees from underrepresented groups and then asking them to sort of be in the position of speaking for their entire group. It's a very heavy burden on employees of color, and so you want to try to avoid burdening your employees with this practice. Fund, support, and empower employee resource groups. These employee resource groups can be sort of by race or ethnicity. If you don't have enough employees for, a Black employee resource group, a Hispanic employee resource group, an LGBTQ employee resource group, you can combine them all, talk to your employees and see what they want. This helps to create networks to connect people within the organization, and then they can also connect with other ERGs in the community. Partners in Diversity offers, we have a pilot Black employee resource group and Asian Pacific Islander employee resource group. So if you don't have these internally, your employees are welcome to participate in the Partners in Diversity groups if you're a member. All right, so prioritize retention efforts. This is essentially investing in recruiting with adequate practices and efforts to retain and develop talent for the long term. I'm having some technical difficulties here. All right, adopt an equity certification program for managers and leaders. Provide resources and training for all employees. You've all heard this before, so I won't belabor it. Finally, On this slide, use your employee resource groups to communicate the challenges and opportunities that employees of color might experience when relocating from a more diverse community to Oregon or Southwest Washington. You can let them know about Portland Nice, share the history of racism in Portland, so it's not a surprise to newcomers. EAPs, I'm sure you're all familiar with these, are generally provided as an employee benefit. You might consider talking with your EAP about culturally appropriate practitioners, so that you can have people sort of the same culture help your employees of color with counseling, stress management, wellness support, etc. Consider implementing a robust offboarding process to learn why employees resigned. This will help you better improve your culture to retain your other employees of color and other employees from diverse backgrounds. And then finally, evaluate and replace HR hiring practices that unconsciously discriminate against employees of color. Again, I know that this can be hard to hear because none of us think that we do this, but consider evaluating the qualifications in your job descriptions. Looks like there's a problem with the slides. Can everyone see that? Can we back up? All right, the last one on this list is really evaluate and replace operational practices using equity policy or an equity policy lens. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but recognizes the differences in cultural perception and quality performance. So again, just as one example, lots of cultures really focus on sort of collective brainstorming and building ideas. And that's very different from individualistic cultures who focus on like what one individual can bring to the table. So if your policies internally award sort of individualistic behavior, and that's a defined term, it's not a negative term, it's just different types of cultural behaviors that are unique to different cultures. So if you look at your policies and they all focus on individualistic cultures, which is the sort of white European cultural norm, you may consider how you can change some of your policies or change some of your practices to also give opportunities to people that come from collectivist cultures to also benefit and be awarded for their contributions that are more collectivist in nature. And we'll just go to the last slide here. Devin, I think you've got the slides now, thanks. So I'm not going to go over all of these because we are really out of time, but again, the Diversity Retention Project, it's available to download on the Partners in Diversity website, and there is a lot more solutions on there. They might not all work for everyone, but they're a great starting point of ideas to consider how they might work for your organization. You can pick and choose which ones apply, some might not apply. You may already have a lot of community involvement built into your organization, and so you can look at the community support and networking section to think about, we're already spending a lot of time and money and sort of donations and things in our community. What else can we do that would potentially help our employees of color while also continuing our tradition of helping the community? Devin, you want to go to the next slide? I think that's the end. All right, that's just the link. Again, it's all available for download. There's also downloads on the business case for diversity. There's information about becoming a member of Partners in Diversity. This certainly isn't meant to be a commercial, but I would just say that they have a lot of really good programs for, again, leadership, HR professionals, and then also networking programs for your professionals of color to just meet other people, to get recommendations from other people of color in Portland. It's really a great resource. It's 12:23. I think we're out of time, and I don't see any questions, but if anybody has questions, I am happy to take them.